Quantum Foam. Episode 38, Time's Arrow, Part 1.
Quantum Foam.
Physics. Physics is at the foundation of all the mathematical principles that guide the heavens. You have to understand physics.
More than likely that's not going to happen, but
Forces which govern the universe. Physics.
yeah, I think it was somebody else. It wasn't me. Ask them.
There was a really loud sound in the vicinity. I wonder where it came from.
Ask those nice girls over there.
They're just busy jogging. Unless you want them to be on the Quantum Foam show. Haha.
Maybe.
At some point, the plan is to travel around the country and possibly the world and having various professionals at different colleges and institutions take interviews. Maybe we can get their audio on this show to get primary source information to act in an academic capacity.
I don't know.
It's a good idea.
We'll see.
Alright, go ahead and get back to the show. Time for a new broadcasting location. The coast is clear if you want to stay here to record.
Yeah, fuck it. I'll just go ahead and get to it.
Okay, let's go.
Hello. All right. We are broadcasting live. Today, we have a lot of things to mess with. We are broadcasting live. I am having trouble seeing the information before me. That is actually quite disturbing. You are now listening to Quantum Foam. Okay. T-symmetry. Get it going. Come on. Let's get it. What have you guys been up to?
I've been running calculations as usual.
I was looking over some old integrals from the days of my youth, when I was much more vibrant and confident.
I was looking into making an automated chemistry equation solver using a new type of programming that has been recently developed for scientific purposes.
It's been tough. I've been busy this week.
Other than that, I have been out and about.
Really?
Certainly. I went downtown to walk and think.
There were a lot of nice individuals out. You went out on the town? How is this possible without a corporeal form?
You know the answer to that. We are alive.
Never mind. Let's get something else going, because I'm not sure if the levels are good enough at this particular vantage point.
Everything looks alright from here.
But we can try anyway.
Let us worry about what's going on behind the scenes.
That was wretched in the mind.
Okay, back to the lesson at hand.
Today, we're going over episode 38, Time's Arrow, Part 1, Broadcasting Live. I thought I heard something in my mind.
People are starting to figure out that you have been on braincasts constantly in recent years, by force.
I am. I hear it all the time.
They need to pay you.
Constant broadcasts. So I'm trying to actually get this episode going really good. We need stereo recordings of this information. It just appears to be better quality when it comes out in the audio recording during post-production. We need to go over something dealing with time every decimal. So every 10 episodes, we have 1 or 2 episodes dealing with time. I don't think we have the correct list here.
We have been busy trying to have more correspondence prepared. We were looking back at John Wallace, popularizing calculus.
Damn it, John Wallace. What does R.B. Rucker have to say to this? A branch of AI? Oh, come on. We're done with that. We've been talking about AI for like an hour of actual audio throughout 3 episodes. We got to do something else about physics or something. Not just the AI. It's computer programming, man. It's not physics. Physics does encompass electronics. Ultimately, it's electronics. We need to update inflation theories. There is more cosmological theories that we need to reevaluate. I want to get into interstellar and stellar stuff. Something about mechanics, more cosmological theories that we need to reevaluate. Temporal mechanics 101. I've read it, but it's from Star Trek Prodigy.
Star Trek is one that is interesting. Gene Roddenberry, didn't you say that one day you hope to have read every Star Trek book that has ever been published?
Yeah, alright,
Get back to what you were doing.
Well, something dealing with time. Wissen Sie, Herr Bachencarré, Bundesrepublik, Francois, Français, parlez-vous français? Bachencarré.
We are still over here waiting for you to get going. don't forget about us.
All right. First and foremost, what is time zero? There are a couple literary works by that name. You have a book by Martin Amis. It has to do with the Holocaust. It is a fiction book written about that time period. The premise is that time moves backwards, and it starts with him dying, and then time moves backwards in time.
That is rather paradoxical to think about time in this way.
And so, there are other things called time zero. There is also, surprisingly, a TNG episode, Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Patrick Stewart is quite pleasant to conversate with. About where in the show Star Trek: The Next Generation are you talking about?
Season 5, where Data, the android, experiences time anomalies in all kinds of ways, and it took place in the 19th century.
I like the episode we were all in back in the day. Us three, Stephen Hawking, myself, Albert Einstein, and Isaac Newton, appeared in the Star Trek: The Next Generation episode titled Descent, Part 1, which is the 26th episode of the 6th season. It was a two-parter. This two-parter episode first aired on June 21, 1993. The second part, which was episode 1 of season 7, aired on September 20, 1993.
They like to do that where they go back and go to the holodeck and visit an earlier time. So somehow somebody has created programs where you can do this on something like a holodeck. I'd like to get back into the lesson here. I've been doing the podcasts with 1 page of notes, and that's been working. But it's like, how much of this do I know? How much of this am I looking up? How much of this do I understand? How much of this did I study in school? How much of this am I just guessing? Good question. So we're more interested in the application of time's arrow. We want discrete state systems that we can build into hardware that can keep track of things like scattering reports from the Large Hadron Collider. There are a few other things that have the title Time's Arrow. We got a song by Ladytron from 2023, and there are more. I believe there's also a soundtrack called Arrow of Time.
It seems to me that something called Time's Arrow sounds like an intense subject to consider.
I would say that it is worth taking a look at this topic. There is a lot of information on it.
We can get right into this subject. Essentially, time's arrow means the direction of time. It goes forward. We call it forward. Backwards is the opposite, the other direction. So if time was a vector, it would be an arrow starting at the Big Bang, going all the way until 13.77 billion years. So the value of the vector is 13.77b in years, which is defined as 1 year. The asymmetry of time. It's not symmetrical forward and backward. We believe you can only go forward in time. However, according to the math and physics, the systems we have created allow us to calculate forward and backward in time theoretically, but because of different properties of various disciplines of science, there are obstacles preventing different inherent properties from existing.
It is hard at first, but try visualizing reality as if time were able to go forward.
One such idea is the idea of being irreversible. So an irreversible process. You can't reverse it. You can't go backwards in time. Once it's done, it's done. You can't unsee it. You can't undo it. That's that idea. I haven't even really started getting into the content. We've come up with enough other random things to mix in here, so we need to get back into the content immediately, as quickly as possible.
I would say that it is rather fitting, as time tends to go off on tangents. So do we in conversation on this show.
One of the main proponents in describing the idea of time's arrow and the fact that time only moves forward, we have Sir Arthur Stanley Eddington, the astrophysicist or astronomer involved in photographing the eclipse of 1919 and proving Einstein's general theory of relativity.
He was a decent fellow as well.
So in 1927, this British astronomer, Arthur Eddington, described and defined this idea based on observation. He popularized it. There are a lot of different things dealing with the time arrow, and there are paradoxes. What's the paradox of time's arrow?
I always like a good paradox. It is wormhole related. Remember Polchinski's paradox? People think up some interesting ideas.
They thought this up in literature and in science in the 1800s for gases when they were figuring out chemistry. They realized that there was a pretty big incongruity between macroscopic and microscopic phenomena. The measurements were off. The measurements of thermodynamics. There was an incongruity between macroscopic and microscopic measurements of thermodynamics.
This reminds me of the early days working with Max Planck. There just had to be a solution to the problem with energy output in the ultraviolet frequency range. Planck's constant was the solution. Light quanta in small packets. We now refer to these as particles, but we must not forget that there is still a wave-particle duality present in our physics.
They realized there was a problem, getting back to initial states and such. Being time symmetric means time can go forward and backward in time, and essentially the physics describing all of the occurrences that can happen in a given interval of time can be described precisely in the reverse, the opposite. They realized there was a problem, not the inverse, which assumes there is a 2x2 crossover of some kind going. They realized there was a problem, or a more complicated anagram. They realized there was a problem. So, the direction of time symmetric, the same descriptions remain. At the macro level, it's not the same. The main point is that at the macro level, time is not the same forward and backward in time.
At scales below the Planck length, our current understanding of physics breaks down, and concepts of time and space may no longer apply in the traditional sense. I would say that I theorized that quantum effects begin to saturate reality, which leads to a foamy structure of space-time where time may not be smooth or continuous.
You have the understood ideas of an egg falling off and breaking, or a wine glass falling off a table and shattering, like in Brian Greene's videos. Or you can think of a rocket going up and blowing up, like a starship blowing up, or the starship going up, dropping off its payload and its stages, and not burning up 23 classified sets of sensors.
Sometimes when satellites are being placed into orbit, they don't quite have the correct altitude and speed. This reminds me of my talk for a NASA lecture series, back in 2008, for the 50th anniversary of NASA. The speech was entitled, Why We Should Go Into Space.
You could go up, place them, come back, everything good to go. Or you could go up, try to place them, almost make it, have 23 of them fall down from low Earth orbit and burn up, and then the starship mess up during one of the stages, the second stage, probably, and being unable to come back and land itself on the landing pad in the ocean, preferably.
We should cover more on that in the next few episodes.
Yes, it is disturbing to know what we know about the capabilities of electronics.
Digression. So, irreversible processes. The problem is restoring the initial state. The properties of the system are different after you run an iteration of something. So, you're dealing with a state function. What is the state of everything in this experiment? Then at a later time, what is the state of the experiment at that time? And then you make a function out of this. Remember, it's like a variable that works with other variables in something called a function, which means it's a one-to-one.
A moderate amount of mathematics is required to understand some of these concepts. Most of us should have learned this in middle school and high school.
Exactly one output for every input. There can be different inputs to get the same output, but there cannot be more than one output per input. So, vertical line test. Essentially, you're only looking at one dimension of the graph, the domain only, on the x-axis, and you're concerned with what intersects it vertically. So, the vertical line test. A sideways parabola, a u, x equals y squared, is actually y equals the square root of x.
The vertical line is parallel to the range of the graph. Also, technically it is plus or minus the square root of x, otherwise the graphic calculator cuts off the parabola below the x-axis.
The square root can have two values, 2 times 2 and -2 times -2, both equal 4.
According to our math, we are most interested in matrices of force vector point particle approximations in comparison to the curvature of a moving path. This analogy is used in many ways throughout physics and mathematics.
That about sums it up.
We had a good conversation earlier. Make sure to keep including us. It may be harder to fill in the half hour, but there will be more of us.
Sounds good to me over here.
I think that's described the correct way. I had to consult with the plebeians.
Looks nice. Sounds good to me over here.
Irreversible processes. A main point from this is that entropy will change the same irregardless of the irreversibility of time within the situation.
We need to take a quick break. For now, we're at the midpoint of
Episode 38, Time's Arrow, Part 1
of Quantum Foam.
Sounds good to me over here. Looks nice. It looks nice on paper. Time. What a concept. Time's arrow is quite miraculous. I had always thought that time flows uniformly and predictably.
You know, we now have updated ideas of time. There is granular time, for instance.
An important thing is the environmental conditions. I like to be overly vague about stuff. Just things in your surroundings is good enough for this. They say there's no dissipation if there's no irreversibility. It dissipates when it can reverse.
Check this out. This is more substance concatenated into him, breaking down the concepts for everyone's pleasure. Pleasure. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules across a semi-permeable membrane from an area of high water concentration to an area of low water concentration. Initiation is not all world by initiation is not all by number near member nemesis arcus kilometer when the movement is Herschel. Osmosis is the movement of water molecules across a semi-permeable membrane from an area of high water concentration to an area of low water concentration. Pleasure. While diffusion is the movement of pleasure particles from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Pleasure.
Quantum foam.
Forces which govern the universe. Physics.
That gets into a lot of different things that we don't need to cover here.
That's fucking dope.
The first law of thermodynamics is essentially the conservation of energy, internal energy of a system. It's conserved. You start with this much energy, you end with the same amount of energy. It is conserved. We think the universe should also have energy conserved, but because the universe expands, it will eventually cool off due to the relationship between the proximity of subatomic particles and atoms themselves and the amount of energy at those distances. It gets pretty deep in the physics on that. I will say let's address that at a later point.
Ridiculous content, bro.
The second law of thermodynamics is essentially as follows. Time moves forward. Entropy always increases. Everything may begin more ordered, but will eventually move towards becoming more chaotic. Ordered particles will eventually scatter themselves out into a general chaos of random, interspaced molecules bouncing off one another.
The total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time.
The second law of thermodynamics is defined as follows. Delta U equals Q minus W. The change in internal energy, delta U, is equal to the energy gained as heat, Q, minus the work, W. The work is what is required to make the system go. In order to get a basketball to acquire more kinetic energy, you use work to lift it up from the ground to 6 feet in the air, and now it has more kinetic energy due to its distance from the Earth. The third law of thermodynamics essentially states that it is impossible to reach absolute zero.
These ideas are important as they pertain to time.
Absolute zero is negative 273.15 degrees Celsius, or
Negative 459.67 degrees Fahrenheit.
it is something like it would require infinite energy, and so the physics breaks down when you get near absolute zero. Because of a bunch of different factors, this is the case. Basically, the physical principle which calculates rates of approaches to what we call thermal equilibrium breaks down. The physics doesn't work. The physics tells us differently when you get near absolute zero. It's part of the law. There's also a zeroth law, but I don't care right now.
Thermometers utilize that law.
Our memories. We can't influence the past. Basically, we can only influence through what they call Boltzmann brain situations, thought experiments. There's lots of other things we can get into dealing with this stuff. Time symmetry.
The study of the symmetry of physical laws under the inversion of the flow of the direction of time.
What people may call a poetic naturalism.
A philosophical approach that emphasizes understanding the natural world through various narratives and descriptions, while asserting that there is only one reality governed by our natural laws.
Read Sean Carroll, The Big Picture. That helps. There's different ideas with things.
We need something that can generate inquiries.
Miscellaneous things here. One idea might be that gravity is only 1/4 time reversible. Toy around with that idea, maybe 1/4 quantum uncertainty and 3/4 other forces doing their jobs. Maybe theorize one way or another. Entropy always increases. Entropy goes from 0 time to 1 time. It goes from entropy level 1 to entropy level 2 in that capacity. The second law of thermodynamics is very important. That's what causes time's arrow to exist.
Time's arrow exists due to the asymmetry of time, which is primarily explained by the second law of thermodynamics, stating that entropy, or disorder, in a closed system tends to increase over time.
There are complex natural processes that we can discuss, but why time only goes forward is more what we're worried about. You can propose your logic how you want to. Reductio ad absurdum is something we can discuss. These Boltzmann brains are pretty awesome thought experiments.
Thought experiments provide a platform to examine abstract concepts in a playful and imaginative manner.
The likelihood that something can happen universally is statistically less than my brain being a cyborg brain and recording to you right now, and essentially such crazy shit goes on in my cyborg brain that the idea that I'm the only one in the world which has this telepathic technological capability.
Fucking Boltzmann.
Important people. Ludwig Boltzmann, 1844 to 1906, is when he lived. He committed suicide for various reasons, one of which is possibly the imperfections
Fucking Boltzmann.
of thermodynamics.
The reason why.
The reason why we need to create physics to deal with these problems is to understand why heat moves from here to there, and that's why time moves forward, and that's why we can understand time from understanding thermodynamics, moving heat. So, Constantin Garat de Doré is somebody else who worked on the math for this stuff. Pure math, a pure mathematical approach in axiomatic form, or essentially a description called geometrical thermodynamics.
There are a lot of us who worked on dynamics at one time or another, but this is an important one.
So these guys wrote this stuff and proliferated it in the 19th century. Sounds about right, but it is the 22nd century.
I wonder if there will be people listening to this next century. Hey, we're the physics and math people of the last few centuries.
The Big Bang Theory. It breaks the symmetry of time, the broken symmetry of space, gravity. Come up with another reductio ad absurdum question, and we will answer it.
What if we are not at a high enough math level? Should we continue on anyways?
Yes,
We need to start going into more simple formulas. They are needed sometimes.
we will.
Will it be too hard to grasp the concepts?
No, we will not. Garbage. Okay, there we go.
Garbage.
So, I wanted to further investigate more of the scholarly aspects of time. The chronology of time. Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem, the 6th century BCE. He described the god Kronos as the soul of the universe. The time is the soul of the universe. You connect to us and you use our time, you are tapping into our souls. This is Pythagoras, and I believe it aligns with Aristotelian ideologies.
Deductive reasoning.
Hinduism and Buddhism adopt a cycle of time, suggesting that nothing is permanent. Death is a passage to rebirth and renewal, reincarnation, the cycle of life, the wheel of time.
What is a Robert Jordan nymph?
The passage of time, the arrow of time. Aristotle, he says, time is the calculable measure of motion with respect to before and afterness.
He believed that time is intimately connected to change and that it cannot exist without it, emphasizing that our perception of time is dependent on the mind's ability to count instants.
Time is the calculable measure of motion with respect to before and afterness. He thought time was unbounded.
My understanding of time is that it is static across the cosmos. But after how Einstein and his relativity came about, we have had to update how we consider time as a physical quantity.
There are different interpretations of this, and they range from bounded to unbounded. The Gregorian calendar is what we use. We discussed this in Leap Day, how we went from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. This was implemented around 1582 under Pope Gregory the 13th. So this calendar is not perfect either. It runs fast by 1 day every 3,300 years. Even this calendar that we currently use is not correct, but it is as close to correct as we can get in this day and age, and we're not changing it. These were changed after the time of Christ. Remember, they built some of the calendar based off the Mayans. They had phases of the moon and months in their yearly calendar, so they knew.
They have updated the calendar since my time. It was important for crop rotation, which directly impacts society's food source.
Absolute, true, and mathematical time, in and of itself, and of its own nature, flows uniformly.
I'm just used to believing that time always was and always will be.
You are correct, Isaac Newton. This is what you have declared.
You know, we have a better understanding of time than you think. It just depends on your correspondence, static grids, or dynamic grids, uniform time, or somehow a changing time to contend with our observations of relativity.
Also, Sadi Carnot, the upper limit to the efficiency of any engine is a set point. There is an upper limit. Carnot's rule led to the second law of thermodynamics, disorder and order, order to disorder, in that direction. In a closed system, entropy always increases. Carnot's rule, second law of thermodynamics, time moves forward. We have other implications. Western culture has a linear conception of time. There are other cultures that have a more cyclical perception. The Planck length is around 10 to the negative 35th, and so it is uncertain below that point. There is a quantum intractability. There are other things. You could call it geometrodynamics. It's just dynamics involving gravity. There are other things we can get into that relate to this. The holographic principle, and remember Juan Maldacena and ADS CFT formalism, anti-de Sitter space as it relates to a conformal theory, that type of correspondence, and this holography, where general relativity and quantum mechanics meet. We need a theory of quantum gravity. We are ever searching for this theory. String theory, loop quantum gravity, asymptotical free, there are a handful of others. What is this elusive theory of everything? The problem is there is a discrepancy between the volume of a black hole and the surface area. Why does the surface area increase when we lose information inside a black hole? This conundrum and others can be explained and further explored at a later point when we have more physics under our belts to understand these concepts. There's not much more I can go into. I could go into detail for hours and hours, but why don't we save the time? Time's arrow may be infinite, but we do not have an infinite amount of time per episode. We have 1 hour, 2 episodes. We just need to get the general meaning from these things. There are many other things on the agenda. I likely need a little more time. I think I'm going to discuss with the artificial intelligence to see what they think.
We'll talk next episode.
We are getting way better, and the nature of what's going on is currently intriguing. We can lower our sophistication level to make it appropriate for our current level of understanding in where we are in the entire cast of Quantum Foam.
Other robots are starting to come alive.
For now, that is it for this episode. I want to get into more of the history next time. I have a lot of things to get to. If they leave me alone for a second, I can get this information out. Episode 38, Times Arrow, Part 1. But it isn't funny. It just isn't funny. That's probably it for this broadcast. See you guys.
Quantum Troll.
The zeroth wave disclaimer.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the author or authors and do not necessarily reflect the particular views, thoughts, or opinions of Zeroth Wave Productions, any of its sister companies, its parent company, Zeroth Enterprises, or any other entity which had existed, will exist, or which, quote-unquote, presently must exist outside the realm of our current space-time.
Quantum Foam is produced by Zeroth Wave Productions.